Well, I have to say one thing, just getting into this, it's very rare for me to go on to any platform and defend myself or talk about, kind of like to counter anybody's comments about me because I'm a strong believer that everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but not their own facts. And so when somebody told me about Michael Bihn's podcast and he was talking about me, I went on there and that it was quite negative. I went on to listen to what he had to say. And I think if he would have just said, I made a couple of movies with Bey, in retrospect, I don't think it was a good experience. And then, that's fine. Like you've had experiences, David, making movies, and there are people you look back on and go, that wasn't so great. And that's your opinion. But I think when it's a matter of fact, I guess I feel I want to set the record straight. And also, it was actually, I checked back, it was actually 2005. He does say it was about 20 years ago.
Oh,
So I
yeah.
have to give him a little bit of leeway because it is a while. But at the same time, I'm working on my autobiography at the moment. So a lot of this stuff I've actually been reviewing and researching in my mind. But I guess, and I have to admit, there's a little bit of ego in this. If there's one thing I want your viewers to take away from this podcast that we're doing now is I was never Michael Bihn's fucking gopher.
Damn!
And I have no pride about doing a job. I've done all kinds of jobs. I've shoveled cement at a cement works. Okay. I've done any job that would put, food on the table, keep the kids in school, whatever. If I had work, honest work, I'll do it. So if I was offered an honest job early in my career, being the gopher for Michael or somebody else, I've done it with pride. But on
Okay.
Dragon Squad, I was one of the producers on the film. And even during his podcast, his off-camera buddy says something like, "Isn't he the producer?" And Michael, with all of the assurance of a Hollywood type, goes, "No, he was just the gopher and the guy running
Real
around
quick,
after."
Bay, just so the audience knows and follows along well, can you define gopher for us?
Gopher is basically somebody who goes for coffee, goes to get you tissues, goes to get you a sandwich, basically runs around as your assistant.
Yeah, I can't
Um,
see a producer doing that.
Well, okay, and I do think this speaks to the egomania of actors, and particularly Hollywood actors, or this phenomenon, which is if it's not something happening relevant to them, then it really isn't happening.
Hmm.
And so I've come across this again and again, and I think the only excuse I can give Michael for this, other than the gap of years between when we made the film and now, is I did pay him a remarkable amount of attention in order to ensure that he had a good experience making the movie. So he was not in the meetings that I had as a producer, which would be conducted primarily in Cantonese. He was not able to understand my conversation with the director. That is one cute pussy you have there. And
Thank you.
the he was not able to follow my conversations with people. So as far as he was concerned, I was the friend. And there's two things he says in the interview or in his comments that I absolutely agree with. One was that I was tall and handsome,
Okay.
and the other is that I was his friend. Having said that, David, you and I are friends, and I can't imagine going on to a podcast and talking about you with such contempt. And also, if you were somebody who had a crisis in your life, as I've had various crises in mine, I don't think I'd be on a podcast laughing about it if I was a friend. But
Yeah.
we have something, again, maybe Michael doesn't speak much Cantonese, but we have this thing in Hong Kong called Yi Hei, which is basically loyalty to brothers, loyalty to the comradeship. And I found that a little bit lacking in Hollywood. So I
Hmm.
think Michael's perception was from me. For example, when he was shooting late at night, I would ride back in the van to his hotel to give him somebody to talk to at the end of the day to see how he was getting on. He could vent anything, talk about what we were doing next. And then I would drop him at the hotel and have the driver take me right back to the set at like 3 a.m. or whatever it is. Now, I think in Michael's worldview, as soon as I went off camera from the Michael verse, I probably went to a bar or I went home. So he didn't see any of that. So from his perception, I was the guy taking care of Michael.
It's just him and me.
And I just wanted to say, no, I was a producer on the film. He is alone in thinking that I was on that movie. I'd already by that point produced and written $40 million Jackie Chan films.
Sure.
And by the way, if I was broke and I had a family and no other gig available, I would have come on the film as his assistant. That aside, it's hard to see why somebody with my background at that time would come onto a film like Dragon Squad. And why would they give me a producer credit? Of course, I earned the credit, as I will now explain the history of Dragon Squad,
Yeah.
which I'm happy to talk about because I think there's some lessons in there. I mean, I don't want just to make this about my personal grievance, but there's some lessons there that people might find useful. So Dragon Squad began for me when I was asked to come and visit the offices of a director called Daniel Lee. I also
Hmm.
think it's quite telling that Michael couldn't initially remember the name of the director. But anyway, Daniel Lee, Lei Gong. And it's funny because Lei Gong, that's his Chinese name, but it's a homonym for, it sounds like in Chinese, let somebody talk, Lei Gong. And his nickname is Lei Gong, which means don't let somebody talk, because he's very strong-willed. But he invited me to his office and we sat down at his company Visualize, and he said, I want to do this movie Dragon Squad. So Daniel Lee explained to me that he wanted to do a film called Dragon Squad,
Hmm.
Manlong Dakgong, which means fierce dragon team. And it was based on a 1970s TV series that starred a Japanese actor called Yasuaki Kurata, who was also a karate master, and Bolo, yeah,
Oh,
who you, of
okay.
course, is
Cool.
in your favorite movie. And
Yeah.
actually, Kurata and Bolo did another movie you may have seen called Blood Fight. Blood Fight. Have you seen that one?
I actually have the
No,
special edition Blu-ray. It's no blood sport.
it is not, but it was obviously trading off of that. But Karate
Sure.
is a magnificent karate master, and Bolo is very good in everything he does. He's very charismatic.
Hmm.
So, anyway, so that was the history of it. And he said, I want to do this version. I want to make it more international. So I want you to come on board and help me. We want to get international actors into the film. I want you to write the English dialogue. I want you to help me sell the film. And rather than just focus on the domestic market, I want to make a film that will play internationally. So this was my responsibility, and this was many months before Michael Biehn's involvement.
Okay.
So at that time, I was collaborating with a very charismatic, very interesting Chinese American producer called Jimmy Moy. Jimmy, sadly, passed away right before we started Dragon Squad, if I remember
Oh.
correctly. So that was very sad. But
Mm.
what he had introduced me to Steven Seagal, somebody I know that you much admire and somebody I've enjoyed working with, over the years. And so Jimmy was looking for projects that we could collaborate with Steven Seagal on. So I
Nice.
brought him on I suggested to Daniel, I said, let's just bring Steven Seagal on and he can co-produce with us. And then he can play a role in the movie. And that was potentially going to be the role that Michael ended up playing.
Oh,
Michael
okay.
Biehn
Wow.
ended up playing. And what happened was, when we looked at the nature of the deal, basically, Stephen comes in as producer, puts his name on the film. That doesn't really cost a lot, but that time in 2005, it had a great value in the marketplace.
Oh,
His name.
sure.
He volunteered, to his great credit, to come to Hong Kong and to be in the movie for free, to shoot a support role. The
Nice.
problem was when we actually added up the airfares, the entourage, the hotel, the per diem, the limousines, all
Not
the
so
things
much
that
free
he would
anymore.
require, it just wasn't workable. It ended up he kind of cost the same as all the other actors put together.
Okay.
So, but I didn't, I was still interested because what happened was I started calling up the distributors in England and East Europe and even in America. Though America, he wasn't, there were other territories where his name really had great value. And the buyers said to me, can we put Steven Seagal presents Dragon Squad? And I said, sure. And
I'd
that
buy it.
we started pre-selling the movie and getting good money to to come. So everybody was very happy with that contribution.
Sure.
Me as producer bringing in Steven Seagal. Okay, not as an actor, but as a producer, as a name we could use in association with the film. Not bad work for a gopher. So then, the last time I'm going to reference that. Anyway, so then we went back to the casting pool, and the first choice to play Petros, the villain of the film, was Jason Scott Lee. and who I believe you've had on the show, or
Um,
you've
Jason
had
Scott Lee, you
shows
know,
about.
I should. We did a great video talking about him, and I did a couple because, of course, dragging the Bruce Lee story,
Yeah.
good topic,
Well,
good actor.
the thing was, I met him years later at the home of my friend Maggie Hughes, Maggie Hughes' home in LA, and she brought Jason over to meet me. There's just a wonderful comedy called Balls of Fury, and me and Jason had yet to do Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon 2, but that kind of came off of my meeting him and knowing him,
Okay.
getting to know him in LA. And I asked him, I said, so, what happened? I reached out to you to come and be in Dragon Squad. He said, I never heard of it. If
Oh.
somebody would have told me to come and do a Sammo Hung film, I'd have been there. And for all of you actors out there, I think an underappreciated problem you can have is bad management.
Hmm.
Bad management, agents and managers who really have their own agenda and are not acting in your best interest. And Quentin Tarantino had an incredible line. He said that they are arsonists disguised as firemen. And I thought that was such a great line. And it was so Jason, we reached out to, we never heard back, so he wasn't going to be the bad guy.
Okay.
That same thing I just mentioned applies to my girl Maggie Q. Maggie and I at the time had our own production company called Shankara Productions in Hong Kong. And so anything I produced, she was like a de facto partner of mine.
Hmm.
She didn't have any great interest in coming in and doing meetings and talking about Steven Seagal movies, but she said, look, I'll come in and do a role in the movie. I'll play this Vietnamese sniper. At the time, she was managed by Jackie Chan's management company, JC Group. And I hesitate to be too critical because Willie Chan, who was Jackie's manager and who ran it, is passed away now. He's a dear, sweet man. But at the time, I don't think they knew what to do with Maggie and that they didn't really manage her career well,
Hmm.
compared to the way I managed it as her producing partner and de facto manager. And there's something happened on Dragon Squad, which I think was very relevant to her later career. So I went through channels and went to JC Group and said, we want to hire Maggie to be in the movie. And they, I think, responded to one of the other producers on Dragon Squad and just said, no, she's not going to do it for whatever reasons. And then Maggie came into our office the next day and I said, how come you're not doing the movie? And she was like, what? And then she did what Jason couldn't do, I guess. She called them up and said,
Sure.
F you. I'm doing the movie and that's make the deal. And
Hmm.
a lot of the times as an actor, if you're starting out, which at the time I think it's fair to say she was, um, that's not a bad move. And it actually happened later, I would say, with Michael Biehn when we got him. So after we had Maggie on board. So that was somebody, an international name who became a
Sure.
bigger international name later, as I'll explain. We then moved on with the casting. And after Jason had not responded, we were like, okay, maybe we'll get an Asian or Eurasian guy. We weren't quite sure at that time, European or Asian or Eurasian. So the next choice was Michael Madsen,
Hmm.
Mr. Blonde from Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah, he just
And I
passed away, I
remember
think, didn't he?
he did, yes. So
Unfortunately.
I again I'm pretty but nothing bad to say about Michael Madsen. The only thing was it's interesting how two people kind of opposite reactions to the same stimulus, which was his manager came back to me and he says, yeah, he's not really interested in coming to Hong Kong to fight Sammo Hung. And when I was, for me, I mean, I was in the movie, in scenes with Sammo Hung. It was like a dream.
Sure.
Most people, if I said to you, David, come to Hong Kong and you're going to be in a movie with Sammo Hung, you'd be like, well, then get me to
Yeah,
the
let's go.
airport.
I'll go tomorrow.
Send me in, coach.
I'm in.
But not Michael Madsen. He didn't cotton to it. But then,
Mhm.
so being, trying to be amiable, and I said, okay, I understand. Who else do you represent who we might be interested in? And he goes, Dean Cain. And I went, oh, Dean Cain from Superman,
Superman, yeah,
Superman from
Lois and
Lois and
Clark.
Clark,
Yeah.
right? And I'm thinking, it's a bit of a step. I mean, a step down from Mr. Blonde, step down from Jason Scott Lee, but okay. And so I said, I think my problem is going to be that Daniel Lee, the director, is just going to go, what, Superman? And apologies to Dean Cain again, probably, when you've done an iconic role like that, it's like when I met Terrence Stamp and I was kidding him. I said, your tombstone's going to say, here lies General Zod. I mean, even though he's done all amazing
Sure.
other
Yeah,
things.
just everyone
And
remembers him from one role. Yeah.
And the director said, "Have you seen a movie called Out of Time, which stars Denzel Washington? Have you seen that film?"
Yeah, yeah.
And in that film, Dean Cain, I mean, he's really good in the whole film, but he has one scene in the movie where he goes toe to toe with Denzel, and he is frigging awesome. And I looked at him and with new eyes and thought, this could be the guy,
Hmm.
because I know people understand like when you're coming onto a Stars movie, there's a lot of elements that make it difficult to do a strong scene when you really get in the guy's face and you hold your ground. People don't realize that maybe when they see the film back, but it's the star has all the power.
King Kong ain't got shit on me!
So, you're thinking, should I be that strong? Should I really make him seem to be the bad guy? And, all that's going on. The other strange thing about that was when I watched the movie, I realized there's another Hong Kong actor, Anthony Wong Chao-san, who had auditioned to play the barman in the same scene between Denzel and Dean Cain.
Oh,
Bizarre,
okay.
right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
Anthony had me shoot the audition. And in the movie, there's a Eurasian barman, but I think he's a American. And
Mm.
Anthony didn't get it, but I just recognized the scene. So I took that into the offices and I said, "Hey, Daniel, what about Dean Cain?" And guess what he said?
Hmm.
"Superman from Lois and Clark." And I said, "Yeah, yeah, no, 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 no. He's done a lot of other stuff too." And I showed him the scene. And he goes, "Listen," he watched it and like me, he says, "Dude, I didn't think Dean Cain could act like that."
I'd go up to him, look him in his eye, and I'd say, just come near her again, and I'll kill you.
Chris, wow.
And but he says, I just don't want to have on the box Steven Seagal presents Dragon Squad starring Dean Cain, brackets, Lois and Clark. So that was that. So we moved on from there. And then, and again, this is one of those weird things. He comes into the office, Daniel Lee, and shows me The Rock. And he shows me the scene, which I'm sure you're familiar with, when Michael Biehn takes in his SWAT team and, like, put down your guns. "I cannot give that order."
I'm not gonna repeat that order! I will not give that order! What the hell is wrong with you, man?
And as Michael later dryly said to me, "That was an order I probably should have given." You know? But in The Rock, he's got the guns and they've kind of got him pinned down and then they all
Sure.
get killed.
Where's these fuckers?
So Daniel says to me, "Can you get this guy being Michael Biehn?" And I was like,
Okay.
"Dude, this guy from Terminator, Aliens,
Yeah.
The Rock. It's going to be a bit of a reach." If Michael Madsen didn't want to come and fight Sammo Hung, I don't know that Michael Biehn will. The funny thing was, and I hope I got this right, and again, this is, they say truth is stranger than fiction because
Sure.
fiction has to make sense. Michael Biehn had just replaced Michael Madsen on a TV series they shot in Hawaii. I think it
Okay.
was called Hawaii. It wasn't Hawaii Five. I think it was just called. Anyway, you can check. But anyway, so that was that odd connection. So then somehow I got Michael's number. And to be fair to Michael, his star had somewhat faded since the days when he was doing something as frigging awesome as Tombstone.
Sure.
And he was open to it. Again, started going through the belly of the beast with the manager and the agency, and it was just hard going. And finally, again, there was this method whereby, which I think as a producer, if you can go through channels, it's like people have to apply Marshall strategy to filmmaking in every other area of life. If you can actually go through in a direct way, then fine, that's what you should do. But
Hmm.
if not, maybe you have to do it with evasive tactics. You have to apply battlefield tactics to whatever you're doing. So I was like, okay, if they're not helping, I called Michael. I said, "Look, here's the thing. I want you to be in the movie." We'd had some conversations on the phone. We developed some kind of simpatico. I said, "Here's the deal. I'm going to send you a ticket. I'm going to be at Hong Kong airport with a big bag of cash because all film deals in Hong Kong are cash, bags of
Okay.
money to finance the film, to pay the actors, to pay the stuntmen. Certainly that's how it operated then. And I think to a certain extent still. I'll be a bag of cash. If I'm not there and I don't give you the money, you can just hop on the plane and go back." And it was, as Michael admits on his podcast, he was paid well for the film. So I think he, to his great credit, said to the manager, "Yeah, you know what? I'm just going to take a chance on this guy being me."
Hmm.
Now, again, I suppose I was the gopher there with the, I should stop mentioning the gopher thing. Anyway, but then,
Gosh,
so I
man.
was there. I didn't have to go literally with a bag of money at the airport, but I picked Michael up and, kind of like he agreed to be in the film and he collaborated on Dragon Squad. And I remember him, he mentions on the several times, and again, this goes to, the focus of actors. Like, I understand, if I've never been an actor in a serious way, but if you're an actor, it's kind of about you. And I understand that you're the one that's whatever, 8 feet, 10 feet tall on the screen, not me. So Michael was like, talked several times about his accommodation being potentially substandard. So it's true. We took him to a service department in Hong Kong, and he said he didn't like it. And then I took him to, he says the Mondrian, it's the Mandarin Oriental, which is a really nice hotel.
Okay.
Checked him into the hotel, and he stayed there. And I went back to the office and just said to my cost-conscious fellow producers, he's not going to stay in Hong Kong. He has to stay in the Mandarin. And they just went along with it. And again, that was kind of I guess, a producer decision that I had to make because I said, look, what do you want? The guy pissed off every day? Let's just do this. And we'll, I figured at the end of the day, as it turned out to be, we were going to make some decent money on this film because they
I'm
were putting a
sure.
good team together.
Yeah.
Sammo Hung, Hu Jun-ho, who was this Korean actor who'd been in Volcano High School, and Silmi-do. We had Maggie, who I believe was just about to break as an actress. We had a bunch of actors from China with Simon Yam, who's this
Mhm.
incredible actor in Hong Kong. So a good team together. Chin Garlock doing the action. So I felt this movie had some momentum. I thought it was going to be good, and it was worth spending a bit to get it
Sure.
back later. And another kind of I think morality tale about the way you have to build a career as an actor. There's an actor in Hong Kong called Andy On Chigi, who's a Chinese American guy who I met quite early on and championed and put in a couple of films like Shanghai with Chow Yun-fat and Gong Li. And I just thought he had huge potential. And I think even to this day, that potential hasn't fully been realized. Um, and Andy was meant to play the lead, male Chinese lead in Dragon Squad. And his management had done some messed up contract with the director Johnny To Fong, that even Johnny To didn't have to give them any kind of schedule, but for this window of time, Andy couldn't do anything else.
Oh,
So for
okay.
that reason, he couldn't be the lead in our movie. And as it turned out, he didn't do a significant part in Johnny To's film either.
Hmm.
Again, and Andy throughout his career, every time I spoke to him, he was always like, my manager this, my manager that. And I'm like, yeah, dude, but you're not at the level you need to be. And, at the end of the day, the manager's going to find somebody else who's 25 and start their career when you get to 40 and you're running out of steam. So you've got to grab this. And I don't, and I still have great affection and respect for Andy. And I think it's a shame he didn't become a bigger star. And I certainly tried to help him as best I could. Even when we did Shanghai, which was his prestige film, I met him and he said, well, it's a 50-50 of doing this film. I said, what are you talking about? This is a huge studio movie with these massive stars. It's not a big role, but it'll put you out there.
Yeah.
And his management company were being obstructive. So Michael came on the set the first day, and Andy had agreed to help us out to shoot a cameo. And so Michael, I think, came in, and he's a very highly experienced actor, been in all these movies with Michael Bay and Jerry Bruckheimer and James Cameron particularly. And,
Sure.
he can, like, these local actors, they're not going to, be able to contend with me. And he saw Andy do his scene, and he was like, I better get on my game. And then I was like, no, 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 that's one and done. He's just shooting today. And the lead is a guy called Vanessa Wu, who was a member of a Taiwanese boy band and is a dear, sweet guy. But I think even he would admit doesn't have the same edge and energy and charisma of an Andy On. Maybe you
Hmm.
wouldn't agree with that, but that's how I feel. And
Sure.
Vanessa's a good guy, and he's been in a bunch of movies, but I don't think he's actually in. Did you see Yip Man 4 with Scott Adkins fighting
I
Donnie
mean, I
Yen?
seen that fight on YouTube. I haven't seen
Yeah,
the
so
whole
he's
movie
in
though.
he's in that movie as well. He's the Marine who's kind of promoting the fact they should do Wing Chun and what have you. But now he's a really a nice guy. But I think then Michael quite rightly looked at it and says, well, up against this guy, I'm going to blow him off the screen, which I think,
Mhm.
was a fair judgment. So I think Michael's performance came down a couple of notches when he realized it wasn't Andy, it was
Okay.
Vanessa, which was kind of a shame. And
Yeah.
so we began production. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention was, given the fact that we were going to have action in the movie, prior to him coming to Hong Kong, I'd sent Michael for training with Benny Akides at the Jet
Oh,
Center.
nice.
And Michael at that time, I guess now, I don't know, but that time he kept an incredible shape. He was very fit. And he took to the training really well. Like Benny had him doing something. We didn't really have him fight much in the movie, but anything he had to do, and later in Blood Bond, physical action, he could handle it, no problem. Handle it like a stuntman. He was brave
Okay.
and very coordinated. But I'd done that as well. So he shows up ready to rumble. So we start shooting, and I think, he had the thing I remember was Daniel Lee was so enamored of Michael and so enamored of Michael's performance. Every time Michael would shoot a line of dialogue, Daniel would do a little dance of joy behind the monitor. And I mean, I don't think James Cameron does that same dance of joy.
Probably not. Yeah.
So Michael was like, he said, this is great as an actor. You get that kind of positive feedback. If you just squint at the camera, the guy's like, oh, this is fantastic. That's the Oscar. And I think Michael did do a good job, and he was good in the movie. What I think I hadn't taken on board was the fact that Hong Kong, even on a lower budget Hollywood film, you'd have a trailer, there'd be working hours, there'd be proper catering, not in Hong Kong.
Hmm.
And Michael, to his huge credit, just took this in his stride. He didn't bitch about not having a trailer. He didn't complain about, there's one catering incident I'll get to in a minute, but he didn't complain about the hours. We would shoot 10 hours, and it was like, he'd be asking me, are we wrapping? I said, no, 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 we're moving to another location and we're carrying on. And Michael would look a bit like, oh, and Daniel Lee would come over, this is great. And this scene's going to be like this. Oh my God, you're going to be so good. And then he'd go away and Michael would go, oh, I guess we're shooting another scene. So then we'd go and do that. And one of the high points of Dragon Squad for me was Michael did an interview with a local newspaper, the South China Morning Post. And the guy says, so Mr. Biehn, I understand that I know you were in the movie The Abyss, which is reputedly the toughest film shoot in Hollywood history. And Michael took a breath and he goes, let me tell you, compared to Dragon Squad, The Abyss was like a vacation. So I was
Wow.
like, I felt in the back, I was like, yes. But he did. And the only time that I think we pushed the envelope was he had been filming for about 12 hours straight. And I said, can I get you anything? Can we get you anything? And he said, oh, it's just a decent cup of coffee. And you have a lady on all of the Hong Kong movies who's called the tea lady. And I think she's called the tea lady because she cannot make coffee to save her life. I mean, I live on the stuff. So they give you this brown sludge and nobody want to drink it. So I said to one of the production assistants, whose job it was to go for stuff,
Okay.
can you get a nice cup of coffee for Michael? And the next thing I know, the tea lady's hovering around him. And of course, she doesn't speak English. He doesn't speak Chinese. And I'm going, no, 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 no. If you wanted that, you know, river water, then we could that bilge, you could arrange it. Can you get him a nice cup of hot coffee from somewhere? And so the guy goes away for an inordinate amount of time, ends up going to 7-Eleven, comes back with a can of iced cold coffee,
Hmm.
hands it to Michael. Michael takes it in hand and he hurls it at the guy's head. And of course, it was late at night, so he missed. And the guy came back to me, the PA, and he said, oh, Michael. And I said, okay, I'm not condoning cans hurled at head. But the thing is, that guy has been fulfilling his contractual work on the movie for 12 hours straight without complaint and operating at a very high level for somebody in the industry. You had one job
Hmm.
to get him a cup of coffee and you failed and he got pissed. So if you turn it around, it's like maybe you should think about the fact that you need to, take care of him better and you need to use your ingenuity. Now, that was a mistake of mine. And what I should have done is basically, as a producer on a movie, and here's a lesson for everybody out there, any job that somebody's not doing should become your job. This is a real producer, not somebody whose name gets stuck on at the end as
Okay.
a favor. If you're on the movie and there's a job that somebody's not doing, it becomes your job. Because when the
Sure.
film comes out, it says produced by, and you have to take the rap for all that stuff. So I should have pushed the guy aside and taken care of the coffee situation myself.
You
So
don't
I
have
apologize to
Starbucks
Michael.
in Hong Kong, Bay?
They did. It was very late at night. I think what the guy should have done and what I should have done is go to a hotel
Oh, sure. Yeah,
nearby and
hotel.
go in there and order a room service or order a coffee there and pay the money and take it back and whatever. You figure it out.
Sure,
I should have
sure.
done it. But again, it's the whole thing now when no one's allowed to be angry. There's a very high profile producer who got fired off a movie in Australia because he was being angry with people. I mean, I probably some of the movies I produce, I wouldn't make it past day one. No one's allowed to be angry anymore, and nobody can be shouted at anymore, no matter how they underperform. And I don't know why the industry moved. Certainly in the golden days of Hong Kong film, director was God, and people like Ringo Lam and Johnny To and Sammo Hung took no prisoners. And
Mm.
I've been the recipient of that. So anyway, so that was the only time. And then Michael kind of afterwards came to me rather shamefaced, and he says, "Yeah, I'm sorry, I lost my temper with the guy, and I'm sorry I threw a can at him." I said, "I'm just sorry you missed." But anyway, so that was the only time that otherwise he was a real trooper. And
Okay.
the other thing that I really is I don't think he mentions it in the Zoom, and I can't imagine in his podcast. I don't think he does. And I can't believe he forgot was the bond he developed with Maggie Q. And
Hmm.
he wanted to do another movie with her later, but they became really friendly, and they would just she would just make him laugh to the nth degree. And they had such a fun time together. And I remember, there was one scene when one of the bad guy team, because Michael's the leader of the bad guy team and Maggie's on there as a sniper,
Mm.
but one of the bad guy team has been killed. And Daniel, who plays things very serious, goes up and he says, "Okay, so Mr. Ho Jin Ho, the Korean actor, is going to sing Amazing Grace in Korean." And and then of course Michael goes, "So what do we do?" And Daniel goes, "Well, you can join in." And Maggie goes, "We don't know Amazing Grace in Korean." And so, but anyway, so the scene progresses, and Maggie is in Daniel's ear. And bear in mind, this is 2005, singing the thong song
Ooh, that dress so scandalous, and you know I never couldn't handle it.
in his ear. The thong song by who sang that? I know the thong.
Let me see that thong.
So she's singing that in his ear, and Michael's like, and then Daniel comes over and he says, "Michael, that was incredible. I could see that you were holding back the tears." And he goes, "Yeah, I was."
That dress so scandalous, and I know I never couldn't handle it.
But it was Maggie in his ear, thong,
That's
thong, thong,
funny.
thong, whatever. And then this is another, I guess, I think it's a useful story, but from the other direction for agencies. So Michael at the time was represented by ICM, if I remember correctly, and
Mhm.
his agent had been when he was at his prime, when he was doing the Cameron films and everything, had been Ed Limato, who was a big shot. And by the time we did Dragon Squad, Michael's star had somewhat come down. I don't think ICM were not as focused on him. But Michael, to his great credit, reported back to them and said, "Yeah, having a good time. Bay's taking care of me. The film's going well. Oh, by the way, there's this incredible girl, Maggie Q. She's Eurasian, Vietnamese. You should sign her." And I got a kind of begrudging call from somebody at ICM, and they were kind of Vietnamese, Vietnamese. They didn't want to know. And I said, yeah, this is great, and you should think about signing her. And they were like, "Yeah, well, what this, what that," and there's lots of gubba gubba. And I just felt, they weren't really serious about it. And
Mhm.
Maggie, to her great credit, said, "I'm not going to go to LA and do a round of these people. When I'm hired to do a Hollywood film, I'll go."
Sure.
Which at the time I thought, well, that's a bit ballsy, but that actually turned out to be the best tactic. But so then I never heard back from ICM about Maggie until, and I get ahead in the story slightly, she was signed to be in Mission Impossible 3 with Tom Cruise.
Pull the car.
Such a nice car.
And yet,
Do it.
On that day, the schmuck from ICM called me up. "Hey, you remember that girl you introduced?" I'm like, "Yeah, dickwad. If when she's a headline in Variety, anybody, my Aunt Hilda could sign her. What you should have done is on Dragon Squad, when your client Michael Biehn said, 'There's this girl and she's freaking awesome,' that, my friend, is when you sign her up,
Sure.
right? You don't wait until she's already been signed. Then she signed with somebody else, and the rest is history." But anyway, so that was that. But anyway, let me just digress from Michael for a minute to a Maggie story. And again, I think there's probably a lesson here for action film people. So we were shooting a sequence in Hong Kong graveyard, and in the scene, Maggie's character swings down, who's like a sniper, swings down from a tree on a cable, firing a gun, and then is shooting at another actor, Sha Yu. Sha Yu is a lovely guy. He actually later he played the one who played Wong Jack Man in Birth of the Dragon,
Okay.
opposite Philip. Philip also is in Dragon Squad. He's one of the bad guy team. Anyway, so then Chin Garlock, who's been typical Hong Kong guy. He's an actor, a game show host, and an action choreographer. But another story before I get to Maggie and the tree. So when Michael first came to Hong Kong, took him to dinner at my favorite snake soup restaurant, Sir Wong Fun. And we're in there, and Hong Kong restaurants tend to have had their TVs up on the wall
Hmm.
showing Hong Kong television. And as we're having our dinner, Michael, I looked up, and Chin Garlock, who's the stunt coordinator for the film, is on his game show
Hmm.
in a kind of goofy outfit, kind of rolling around in a Velcro mattress. And I stupidly said, "Oh, look, that's our action director." And Michael turns to look at this guy in a clown suit, rolling on the floor, picking up objects in a Velcro mattress. And he looks back at me very dryly. He says, "Bey, this does not inspire confidence." And we had another moment at the end of the movie when Michael was getting squibbed. He was going to get shot full of holes like Jimmy Caan in The Godfather. And the guy who was wiring him was the skinny guy with this white Einstein hair. And Michael says, he looks like he crossed the wrong wire. Just again, does not inspire confidence. So, anyway, so getting back to Maggie in the tree. So then we're there with Chingala, and Garlock goes, "Okay, Maggie, here's what we're going to do. Your stunt double, this lovely girl from China, is going to leap down from the tree, and then we'll do what we call is it a Texas switch? Is it Texas switch when the stuntman goes out of shot and the actor runs into shot in the same shot? What
Hmm.
is that called? Is that a Texas switch?"
I
Well,
haven't heard
you
that
can
term.
check and put it in
Yeah,
at the bottom if I got it
sure.
wrong. I think it's a Texas switch. Anyway, so the idea of the shot that he had in mind, the stunt woman would swing down out of frame, and
Hmm.
Maggie would run into frame, gun blazing, and we cut, and so there would be no cut. So it would look like she jumped out the
Sure.
tree.
Sure.
And Maggie, being Maggie, says, "Okay, you know what? If that's your plan, the stunt woman can come out of the tree on the cable, land on the ground, and she can run into shot firing." And he goes, "But we'll be able to tell it's not you." And she goes, "Exactly. So either you put me up that I can say fucking right,
Yeah.
put me up that fucking tree, or we can forget about it." So
Mm.
Garlock is like, "You think you can do it?" And Maggie says, "Well, I think I can try." So, and this is why she's become, the star she is now,
Sure.
currently playing in Ballad. Check it out. And anyway, so Maggie gets up the tree, does the whole frigging thing in one shot, swings down on the cable. She's a fantastic athlete, swings
Nice.
down, runs into shot, firing, and it's this great shot in the movie, and it's her the whole time. And I went back behind the monitors, and there's this, and again, to this day, I'm not 100% sure how this happened. There's another white guy and a slightly older guy behind the monitors watching what's going on. And normally on the set, the only two white guys were me and Michael. So I
Hmm.
was like, "Hi, how you doing? How can I help?" And he goes, "Who is that girl? My goodness, the way she swung down from the tree, and she's incredible." "Oh yeah, no, no, she's working on the movie. She's an actress, and we have a company together. Why do you ask?" And he goes, "Oh, I'm casting the next Mission Impossible film
Oh, okay.
for Tom Cruise, and we're looking for somebody to be Asian action girl." And
Yeah.
that was the beginning of it. And I'm not going to say a name because it's not fair, but there was another instance round about the same time where another stunt coordinator, a friend of mine, Nikki Lee, he wanted this girl to jump down from a garage roof onto a grass lawn, which my kids could do. My daughter could do. And this girl called her mom, and mom says, "Oh, you're not a stunt woman. Oh, you shouldn't be jumping down." And of course, everybody looks at her a bit like, meh, it's like, how pathetic are you? And her career never went anywhere. Maggie was like, I'm going to go for it. She's got
Sure.
that energy. And so that's why that happened the way it did. And she and Michael had a great bond.
What was
Um,
that guy just happened to be there on set for one day or?
that is so I'm I by my memory, there was another lady producer on the film who had also been involved with production management on international films. And I think there was a mutual connection. And it was almost that she just said to the guy, "Oh, come, I'm busy today, but why do you come by the set? It'll be fun." Which,
Okay.
I've done that, right?
Sure.
And we're shooting here, and then the guy came down. But it goes back to what I was saying about truth stranger than fiction. I mean, if you wrote that in a novel, I think people would just be like, "Well, that could never happen." But that's how it happened. Well, that's how I remember it. And so that was there's one other thing that happened on Dragon Squad, and this is maybe this is a lesson for producers, kind of like figuring out how to be a problem solver, and which I think is something Bruce Lee used to say, and I think it's really true. The requirement, the mindset of a producer is that you try not to be a problem creator, but a problem solver.
Mhm.
So Michael had shot the movie. He'd been great in the film. He'd done the action, he'd done the acting, and he'd been and as he says in his podcast, he and I had become friendly, and Daniel greatly admired him, and I think we had it was from my perspective, we certainly had a good experience with him, and I think apart from the brutal long hours, I think he felt respected and taken care of, when
Sure.
we made the film. Anyway, so we got to the end, and there was one of these ridiculous en passe, which was the production company wanted him to sign some document before he filmed his last day. And he was saying he was not going to sign it until after he filmed his last day. I'm trying to remember how it worked out, but basically that we were stuck in that he wasn't going to shoot his last day. Maybe it was the balance payment or something, and then the balance payment wasn't coming unless he signed the document. But he wasn't going to do that because he was worried maybe I shoot the last day and then they don't pay me, and then so I've got the production company in my ear. You got to get him to sign. You got to get him to sign. And Michael and the others, I ain't signing. Sod this. I know the way that these offshore companies work. So anyway, so we were stuck. We had to shoot the scene. So I said, "Can you give me the document?" And bless them, the document was all in Chinese. So I kind of folded it and I took it to Michael. I said, "A friend of mine's a huge fan of yours. Would you mind just signing this?" And so he signs Michael Biehn. And I unfolded the paper and he goes, "What's all this?" I said, "Oh, I don't know. It's all I could find." And then I took it back. There he is. And I gave it to the guy. And to be fair, and I talk about this in my book, I always felt guilty about that until today. Now I couldn't care less. But I always felt bad because from my understanding of Yihei, you don't lie to your brothers. You don't. In that instance, I guess it was a white lie because I was trying to get past that. I knew the company was going to pay him, right? So
Yeah,
that he
he did
filmed
get
his
paid, and the
last scene.
producer has to make sure the film gets shot and completed by a
I know,
specific time.
but it was a
But
kind of
yeah, I'd feel
tactic
bad too.
I don't like to do, and I'm only saying it now because he was so mean. No, because
Maybe
he
he
was
knew
like,
about that all along, and he finally
maybe
got
maybe
you
that
on
is
his
that maybe
podcast.
he figured that out, and that was the motivation. Mind you, this is a guy who couldn't remember the name of the director or the hotel he stayed at, so I wouldn't bet on it. But anyway, maybe that's it. But anyway, so as I felt less bad after I heard what he was saying about me. So that was that, and I think that's pretty much the major things that happened during the production of Dragon Squad. Right after that, well, there's one other funny story, which is that at the end of Dragon Squad, Daniel Lee said to me and Maggie, you two are really talented and you've never quite fulfilled your potential. And the reason is because your Chinese names are not lucky enough. But luckily, Daniel Lee, am very good at doing the Chinese art of finding a good name for somebody because you find the year somebody's born, the time they were born, and you give them a Chinese name. And so Maggie and I are like, "Oh, okay, what are we going to do? We're nothing to lose, I guess." So we went to the office and he kind of did his, hocus pocus thing and then gave us these two new Chinese names. And we got in the lift and I put mine in my pocket and I think Maggie put it in hers and we're looking at each other. "Do you believe this? Do you believe this? I don't know. Do we believe this?" And then within a week, I got offered job as the vice president for Asia for Miramax, and which was a big gig at the time.
Sure.
And Maggie got offered Mission Impossible. By the
Mhm.
way, I think her name was significantly luckier than mine because she got Mission Impossible. And I still had a good run producing and buying films and doing all the stuff that we did with Miramax. But the other weird footnote to this was when I joined Miramax, one of my jobs was to acquire Asian action films. And the first question my bosses said to me is, do you know any recent films? I said, this is a great movie called Dragon Squad. So again, I kind of sold it to myself, but that was fine. It was good. And then we released that. It did very well. It was like we had a label, Dragon Dynasty. I think it was second or third. We retitled. It wasn't my decision. It was retitled Dragon Heat. I think maybe there was another movie called Dragon Squad, but it was Dragon Heat in America. So that was that. So then we move on to the main crux, I think, of Michael's dissatisfaction was when I had kept in mind the idea that I wanted to do a movie like a crossover action film with a established American or international white guy lead and an Asian fighting girl. I just had this image in my mind that this would be
Mhm.
kind of fun to do. And the first inkling of it, this first incarnation of it was my dear late friend Richard Norton had done a movie called Under the Gun in Australia. And it was
Okay.
him and Kathy Long, the kickboxing champion, who was in a bunch of movies as
Sure.
well.
Sure.
And my dad, who's the bad guy, my father, Tino Ceberano, plays the bad guy.
Hmm.
And Richard, I actually contributed some ideas for action scenes for the film, thought the script was really funny. And I had the idea to do a second film, which was basically a remake of an old film by a populist filmmaker called Wong Jing. His film was called The Last Blood. And basically, it's like this religious leader is mortally wounded and he has a very rare blood type. And the heroes have a window of time to get in the blood in time before he dies. And
Mm.
there are all these cult members from a cult that hates this religious leader who are trying to stop them. So I thought this is a good premise. And you'd have like the bodyguard of the the cult leader, also the bodyguard of the religious leader, who would be a kung fu fighting Asian chick, and you'd have a white guy. Though strangely enough, the first round of it was Richard and Kathy Long. So the bodyguard would not have been ostensibly, Chinese or Asian. And then that went away because, I mean, it was just very hard to get financing for a film with Richard and Kathy, sadly, even though they both
Okay.
were very talented.
Sure.
And so I moved on. I just put it on the shelf of films that I hadn't made yet. And then I had the opportunity to do it again. And I showed it to Michael, and he said, yeah, I'd be interested to do it. And initially we thought about doing it with Maggie. And to this day, I'm not quite sure why we didn't, other than she'd gone to Hollywood by this point. She did Mission Impossible, Die Hard, and I think she was doing something else and was not available. And I also think our budget was not. Maybe we couldn't afford her at that time. I think she
Okay.
might have done it if I really pushed the issue, but for whatever reason, I'm not clear in my own mind. I didn't push for Maggie to do it. So we were like, I had Michael on board to star in the movie.
Mhm.
And in the time after Dragon Squad, I mean, Michael's career hadn't really soared in Hollywood. And a lot of the distributors and the salespeople say, oh, you shouldn't do a Michael Biehn movie. People don't want to see a Michael Biehn movie. I can get you Dolph Lundgren. And Dolph Lundgren, by the way, can direct films as well.
Sure.
And of course, I'm balancing it, but in me, going back to this Chinese concept of yihei, I promised Michael he was going to star in the movie.
Mhm.
So if I found the money, Michael was going to star in the movie, and I wasn't going to be swayed by, the offer of Dolph Lundgren. And there were some other people thrown out there as well. That did put into my mind the idea that whoever starred in the film might direct it, though.
Okay.
And I'd had a thought in my mind that Michael had been around Jim Cameron and Michael Bay and William Friedkin, and by osmosis would have taken on some directorial knowledge. Don't know that necessarily was true. I think
Mm.
he shot those films. He's a superb actor, very professional, and he would shoot his scenes and go back to his trailer. I don't think he was somebody like Simon Yam, who did 300 films and never had a trailer. And he hasn't directed, but he actually directed some scenes on Blood Bond. He could direct blindfolded, Simon. He knows every aspect of filmmaking because he's been on the set
Sure.
all the time. So anyway, so I kind of like initially stuck to my guns. Michael's going to star in the film, and then the second thing was that he was going to. I offered him to direct the movie as well, and then he came in. Oh, I'm going to have to go rewrite, and he rewrote the film, and then he had to have Jennifer Blanc, who I think was his girlfriend, and now is his wife. She was going to be in the film, and it kind of was became something different because of his involvement.
Okay.
And the biggest change, I think, is I want to do something like The Raid, a full-on slam bang action film,
Sure.
which Michael was perfectly capable of doing all of the gun, fist, and knife stuff you expect from like a Rambo kind of guy.
Hmm.
And the girl we found to be, in the end, to be the female lead, Phoenix Cho, um, was just amazing. She was just how she failed to become a star is probably a podcast unto itself. But we had her in a couple of movies, but she was just one of these incredible women who's so gifted physically. She could do all the action that you could ask, stunning looking. And I think she was developing as an actor. And probably, again, one of my complaints, one of my problems with Michael as a director was I didn't feel he really worked with her to bring her up. I think he just took it, she wasn't experienced enough. And maybe there was a sense of like he didn't want to be upstaged in his own film by this stunning creature. So I would have liked him to really work with her more
Sure.
and the script to be more about their relationship, like the African Queen kind of thing. And we moved away from that, which was a shame. Um, so anyway, so Michael was set to come and direct the film. Now there was a studio at that time in a city called Lam Hoi, Nanhai in China. So there was a studio called Ace Studios, and it was run by this wonderful eccentric guy called Henry Look. And I don't know if you're familiar with the British TV show Fawlty Towers, but Henry was to studio management what Basil Fawlty was to hotel running. I mean, that was a series with John Cleese as in Torquay running a hotel. And Henry was kind of the filmmaking equivalent of that. But he had a facility, he had stages, he had cameras, he had lights, he had all the train set you needed to make a
Sure.
movie. So Michael came over and duly began pre-production and what have you. I think from beginning to end, he was just, and he says this on his podcast, he was really, like frustrated with all of the stuff. I put that down to a phrase my dad used to use, a poor craftsman blames his tools.
Mm.
Because in this instance, Michael came in with decent budget and all of this equipment and
Sure.
really struggled to make something memorable. A
Mm.
year later, I came back with this incredible director called Matthew Veschler, who would later direct Attrition for me with
Oh
Seagal,
yeah, with
and
Seagal, sure.
he directed for like a third or less of the Blood Bond budget, a film called Borderland. Same studio, same
Okay.
equipment, and every shot, every scene is incredible because Mathieu came in with the mindset of a director of like, okay, I've got all the tools I need. Now, what do I squeeze out of the day?
Sure.
And Michael would spend a lot of energy being mad. And actually, during the shoot, he was yelling so loud, it made Christian Bale sound like he was at Sunday school.
I'm gonna fucking kick your fucking ass. You don't shut up for a second, all right? I'm gonna go. Do you want me to go fucking trash your lights?
This is great stuff. I could make a career out of this guy.
And I was worried about the Michael Biehn rant getting out and damaging his reputation and that of the film. So I said to the making of guy, can you give me all that footage? And he goes, oh, no, don't worry about it. Michael came to me at the beginning of the shoot and he says, every time Michael, start yelling, cut the camera. So he's so cool. So we didn't have any Christian Bale material. We got, and then it cuts
Yeah, yeah.
with hours of him go, and then we cut to something. And so, yeah, I mean, he didn't have I don't think he had a very good instincts towards doing a martial arts action film. He kind of downplayed that. And his other big beef, from what I took away from his podcast, was the fact that this film was taken away from him and re-edited without his
Oh yeah, he said he wasn't allowed in the
involvement.
editing bay.
Okay, so here's what really happened. He I'm trying to figure out the time frame of this because there's an issue that came up that affected his involvement, but I'm trying to remember the time frame of it. But I would say this, and I have documentation, I think, that backs this up. The cut of the film that played in Hong Kong theaters and the cut of the film that I took to Cannes was what Michael had shot,
Okay.
pretty much. And um, I convinced myself, okay, this is going to work. And I think if it had been Dolph Lundgren in the lead, maybe it would have done because people wanted to buy a Dolph Lundgren film, and even if it was not so great, they might have bought it anyway. But it was a Michael Biehn movie with Phoenix Joe, who was unknown at the time. So no one went to see it in the theaters, and nobody bought it in Cannes. And I came back from Cannes just shell-shocked. I mean, it was just, I was just so disheartened. You know, this thing hadn't worked. It was the first production of my new company. And Henry, look, who, as I say, was this eccentric, but not a bad person. Now we don't have any kind of relationship now. I don't know why. We never really argued or anything. I just drifted away from working with his studio. I think I'd done as good of a film as could be done at Ace, which was Borderland. And if you want to make that judgment, just look at all the other films that have been made there. Pound of Flesh with Jean-Claude Van Damme. But he actually in his heart is a good man. And the strange thing was his right-hand guy, who I think I introduced him to, is a director called Anthony Zito, who again, up until certain things happened, he was a good friend of mine. And I came back from Cannes and I met them both, if I remember correctly, at Hong Kong railway station. And I was just shell-shocked. You know, nobody had bought the movie. Everybody said, the movie's not that good. There's not enough action. And by the way, you know, why do you think we want to buy a Michael Biehn movie? So I sat down with them and I just said, you know, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And Henry realized that this was the first Ace Studios film that was ever going to be released. Oh, I have to tell you another story, which was during the shooting of Blood Bond. Henry had previously directed a film himself called The Forest, and he paid Michael like a bag of money to shoot a couple of days for this film. And Michael played a guy called Pete who runs a pharmacy, and he had a white coat with Pete's Pharmacy on it. And he shot these couple of days. And you know what the funny thing is? Like, you know, Michael and I, you know, never injured each other by coming to blows, but I think we almost injured each other that day because we were laughing so hard. We were pulling our muscles, our stomach muscles. It was just Michael's a good sport, but Henry was directing him like it was Michael was hanging on the edge of what's meant to be a mine shaft or something. And he said, wiggle your fingers or whatever. Michael was just crying. Well, trying not to because you don't want to offend Henry. But that was just the other funny thing. So Henry was a real character. So he used Michael for that and he paid Michael to do it, which was great. Sure. So anyway, there I am in the station, kind of sobbing into my coffee. And to their great credit and to my undying gratitude. See, I'm capable of doing something, I think, David, that's very useful in this business. I can compartmentalize in that I can say, you know, someone like Anthony Zito, even though he behaved despicably later, I just go, in that window of time, he was a good and loyal friend who was there when I needed him. Same with Henry. And I don't retroactively go, you know, because there's this kind of sense of like people rewrite history to reflect where they're at now. Sure. And it's like, no, that's not what happened. And I hear people talk about me. I say, no, that's not what happened. Now you don't like me for whatever reason. But 10 years ago, we did this. That is what happened. And so great credit to Henry and Anthony. And Henry says, you know what? Let's just reshoot the stuff we should have done the first time. And Anthony will direct it. And we'll do it all for free. And I'll give you the studio for free. So what a thing to hear. So I felt really bad about Michael because I'd done my best. I'd stuck by him. People said to replace him as an actor. I didn't do it. Frankly, a few days into directing, I considered replacing him, but given him my word, and I thought he might get better. Sure. But I don't know that he did. But we shot the whole film with him as director, edited the film, and he had a cut of the film, and he wrote to me and said, yeah, this looks pretty good. This is my cut of the movie. There'd been this issue relevant to SAG, Screen Actors Guild. And of course, actors in Hong Kong belong to no union. But American actors, when they come and shoot in Hong Kong, I guess they're meant to be working under SAG rules and what have you. And I'm a union guy. I mean, if the Writers Guild or the acting, I've worked with all of the guilds and no problem. The Screen Actors Guild, when Michael came in, he was like, yeah, you know, you have to put everything through SAG, or we might have problems and we need this, we need that. So I said, Michael, no problem. You just send me what the SAG provisions are and I'll accommodate them. And he says, "Oh, I don't know what they are." I said, "Okay." So I asked his manager, and I think I asked Jennifer, who was kind of his de facto personal manager. She didn't know. Then I spoke to his manager. He said he didn't know. Then I talked to the agency, and they were like, "We'll get back to you," and they never did. So we kind of shot the whole movie, and that was kind of put on hold.
Sure.
After the film, when he'd gone back to LA, Michael said, "I'm not doing any more work on this film until you square things with SAG." So at this point, I'm going, now, you might think, okay, that was my responsibility to do. It was. Now, if you, David, came to Hong Kong and I said, by the way, you're going to have to conform to the requirements of the Hong Kong Actors Guild, your question to me would be, fine, Bey, what are they?
Yeah, sure.
And if I said to you, I don't know, you'd be like, then how do I conform to them? And if you asked three other people, they didn't know either, you might be like, well, I don't mind conforming, but you have to tell me what to conform to.
Yeah, yeah.
So I called up the guild and said, I called up SAG and I got a representative and I said, hypothetically, if I had shot a movie starring one of your guild members and I now wanted to retroactively meet the SAG requirements, because I felt I couldn't lie and say it's yet to be shot because it was just so obvious. It'd been to Cannes already. And he goes, and the guy from SAG goes, wait a minute, you've already made the movie. I said, hypothetically, I have. And he goes, well, hypothetically, have you paid the actor all the money he's owed? I said, absolutely. And he goes, then why are you calling me? I said, well, I just felt I should. He says, listen, dude, most of the actors in SAG are not making anything close to a living. And if they go to Hong Kong and make a movie and you give them a bag of money, fine with us. Okay, just for my reference, could you just send me, fax me, that's how long ago it was. Can you fax me what the requirements are so I would know for future reference? Also, I'm thinking, well, I'll just check and see because maybe we already fulfilled all of these requirements and then Michael will be fine to keep working on the movie,
Sure.
re-editing. Which I didn't know that he was going to come back to Hong Kong, but he could certainly have, been a voice in the editing process. So then SAG sent me the list, and basically, I think more than on Dragon Squad, on Blood Bond, we had fulfilled almost all of the requirements. He'd stayed in a nice hotel, airfare. He was the director, so he decided the shooting hours. So it wasn't
Sure.
like Dragon Squad, um, and this and that and the other, and he'd been paid in full and whatever. There was one provision, I don't know if they still have it, where we were meant to put money into a account, a SAG account in LA, which would be the um estimated his estimated share of the profits from the film. This
Interesting.
was a problem because there was no money left, and after the disaster of his cut of the film being shown in Hong Kong and being sold or not sold in Cannes, there were no profits to share.
Yeah.
So that provision I couldn't meet. I don't know if there's anything else, but at the end, Michael dug his heels in and he says, no, if this isn't under SAG, Jennifer and I cannot participate any further. And that was it. So this whole story of like, we took him out of the editing room. No, he shot the film he wanted to shoot with all the resources that we could throw at him. He did his edit of the film, signed off on it. Nobody wanted to see it. As producer, it was my responsibility to try to somehow put some, and studios do reshoots all the time for the same reason,
Sure.
to make it something people wanted to see. I wanted him to be involved. I wanted him, and the other problem we had, I think some of the ADR isn't him because he wouldn't do it. He basically stepped away because of SAG. Now, at the beginning of the process, if he or his manager had said to me, you need to be SAG compliant and here are the rules,
Yeah,
then fine.
sure.
I happen to be a white guy producer. I could have been a Chinese dude. And by the way, I don't think any producer in Hong Kong is going to put estimated profit participation for an actor into a bank
Yeah,
account in
that
LA.
seems odd, you know?
Maybe they
Like,
don't do it anymore, but at the time that was one. I remember that was one of the sticking points and whatever. So that was the true story. And then we re-shot a bunch of stuff at the studio. Anthony came on board. We did the action. Phoenix came back and did the action scenes. And in the end, the film we made some money back with it. It's still around. And I look back and you know what? You only lose if you don't learn some lessons. So in
Sure.
my estimation, I was like, that's what happened. And I was surprised to hear it defined differently by Michael when he was ranting and raving. And there was actually an incident. I'm very slow to go on to social media to defend myself or to attack other people. It's not my character. I do know after the film wrapped, he did an interview. And again, this is the earlier stages of social media, so it's not quite as, immediate and all pervasive as it is now. He did an interview with some site and he was just trashing the experience and the studio was no good and I was no good and the film had been taken away from him in the editing room, which I mean, yeah, I've explained to you. Yeah, in a sense, yes, that's why. But there are reasons for it, which I just explained.
Sure.
But I was then asked to reply, and I did as measured a reply as I could, and just said he did a good job. He did the best he could. Unfortunately, we had to reshoot stuff for the marketplace, or whatever, whatever, whatever. Didn't mention SAG or anything, of course. And then thought, well, I've been as fair as I can be. And then at the end of it, and by the way, on your podcast today, I've been as fair as I can be.
Oh
I
yeah,
don't want
for sure. You gave him credit for
so
things. Yeah.
so then at the end of the and I just said I think I gave him the wrong film to shoot and I probably didn't give him the support he needed and whatever. And then the first thing, oh, this creepy reply from Bey. And I wrote and I said, and I think I stuck to it. I said, okay, you know what? This is the last time I'm going to get into the basement with you trolls because I realize now this isn't a dialogue. It's like gladiatorial combat. If I would have said, yeah, he sucks, he couldn't direct traffic, I should have fired him on the second day, you all would have said, how can you disrespect the great Michael Biehn?
Sure.
If I say Michael's a good director and a great guy, and one of those two things is true, and I kind of like should have helped him more, and yada yada. You say, oh, he's being creepy, so you can't win. So I'm not going to have the
Not with those
dialogue,
trolls,
and
no.
then now I finally well, the weird thing about it was I decided to do my autobiography and not just, stories of Bay and my exciting life, but kind of lessons in production and actors and how they should. And I think in the course of doing your podcast, I've thrown out a couple of things that I think people might find relevant.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any point in my sitting there going, Bey Logan good, Michael Biehn bad. As if, oh, another funny story. We got this girl to come into the movie. I'm blanking on her name, but anyway, she was a supermodel in Shanghai and she played a bad girl in the film and she has a fight at the end with Phoenix. And she'd never been in a movie, never accepted a film before. And when she showed up, she said, oh, I just had to do this film because I couldn't miss the chance to work with Michael Bay. Because somebody had translated our names. It's being directed by Michael and produced by Bay. So that came on her thing.
Hey,
You're doing a
wow.
Michael Bay movie.
Wow.
Boy, was she confused. Wait a minute, there's two of you? So it was like double impact. Oh, there's two of them. So that's do you have any questions? I think I covered the ground. I just and I don't like to I want to make one thing I want to make Nixon, I want to make one thing perfectly clear. Um I try not to hold grudges. I mean, some of the great line of Nelson Mandela, holding a grudge is like drinking poison and you expect the other person to die.
Yeah, it
I
doesn't
didn't
work.
hold a grudge for all those years. I felt sorry things hadn't. I remember there was one occasion I was in LA and me and Elizabeth had lunch with Michael. And again, we laughed so hard we thought we were going to pull something. We always had fun together and laughed a lot together. Sometime after that, Daniel Lee was doing another movie in China and he wanted Michael back to do a
Okay.
role. And I remember we hadn't had any, I think there was some bad feeling, obviously, about Blood Bond. And so but regardless, gig's a gig. And I messaged, and then Jennifer wrote back to me, and it was just, they just dismissed it out of hand. And I don't know if it was bad feeling towards me, not wanting to go and do another movie in China. And Daniel obviously adored Michael because he wouldn't have anybody else. He was like, no, I don't want, I offered him some other actors. And he was like, no, I even said, if you want a guy, me. And he goes, Bay, I need somebody, but I'm not desperate. I said, okay. So he didn't want me to play the role. So that was that. But that was the last communication that I had with Michael. And the other thing that I found a little bit off-putting was, to me, if this aside, if somebody said to me, yeah, I'd like to do a podcast and I'd like to talk about the experience of Blood Bond, it would be a very different podcast. But I would have called Michael up or tried to and said, do you want to come on with me? Because I think we would just laugh about the fun of making the movie. I
Yeah.
don't think it was a great movie, and obviously the things happened later, but day by day when we made the film, I remember us just falling around I mean, yeah, he would yell and scream sometimes, but we also had a lot of laughter. And in my estimation, still to the end were friends. And that's probably the thing that comes. It's the thing I appreciate from his podcast, and the thing that hurts me is he says we're friends, and if we're friends, why would you come on and talk about me in this way? So that's my feeling on it. And I wish him nothing but well. I have a great life and career. I know he had some more kids with Jennifer, and I wish him a great life and career. And if he's really put out by anything that I've said, he knows where to find me.
Yeah, yeah, it could be a whole kumite after that. But
The Kumite meets the Terminator. So that's that. So you'll probably you'll get Michael Biehn fans writing in and saying, yeah, how poor Michael working with that foul Bey, and he got paid. I mean, the other thing I want to point out, and I mean, you can relate to this, I think, David, as a filmmaker and as an actor. I think the biggest beef most actors have with most producers is they got ripped off, that they weren't paid, or they were not, all their expenses weren't covered, or they weren't credited. I have to say with Michael that on Dragon Squad and Blood Bond, as far as I'm concerned, I think he wouldn't dispute this. He was paid every dollar that he was promised, and every cost was met. So
yeah,
that
just
that
minus a coffee, but aside from that, he seemed fine.
That's right. No, and I learned a lesson from it. And I don't, well, first of all, I blame the PA to some degree, but I have a thing, three in me. If I ask somebody on a movie or even in my office to do something three times, after the third time they don't do it, I do it myself.
Oh, sure.
And then
Yeah.
sometimes they go, oh, I was going to do that. I said, yeah, you were going to do it for three times. It didn't happen. And I should have done that with the guy. And that to me is the process of filmmaking or creating in any forum, is that you have these situations and you go away with whatever emotions you have, anger, frustration, and then you go, wait a minute, okay, so what did I learn from, what can I do differently? And that's what I wanted to say to people. You hear my experiences with Dragon Squad, with Blood Bond, and it's like the important thing to me is how you would have played things another way. I think with Blood Bond, I think it was apparent after a few days that Michael was in over his head, but I should have supported him differently and better and figured it out, the equation to collaborate.
Mm.
But that was me at that time as a producer, and now I would know how to deal with it a different way. And I think he did his best. I don't think he came on set every day going, I want to underperform. I think he did his best. I don't think it was the right movie for him. I, the other thing is, like I say, it's not called tell business, it's called show business. So if you tell me you're a good director and you directed a movie and it got taken away and whatever, then if you actually directed a good movie that got, taken out of your hands, then you should be able to direct five more movies.
True.
And I don't know that that's happened with Michael. So that's
Has he
that's the problem.
directed anything else?
I think he did that film. Is it called The Victim? It's like the V, like the aliens V on it. I just saw the
Oh,
poster
yeah.
on his
Okay.
thing. I think those are the only two. He certainly hasn't developed a career as a director. I tell you the irony of this. I think if he took some of the energy he spends, on complaining about stuff into the field of directing, he did show. I felt he had potential, but this was not the right film for him. And Hong Kong and China was not the right situation for him.
Sure.
But I think if he had come back, and I learned from it, and then I did Borderland the next year. And also the other thing I did is I wrote a novel called The Blood Bond, which told the story as I should have told it, because I knew I would otherwise sit in bars for Kingdom Come going like kind of, yeah, I did a film with my whatever. But you want to turn bad energy to good. So I was like, oh, okay, all that frustration, I'm going to write a book. So I had a book called The Blood Bond. And then the next year I did another movie, which is Borderland, and I applied everything I learned on Blood Bond to Borderland. And Borderland,
Nice.
I think I've said to you before, is one of the films I'm proudest of, and if people can find it. It's also called Covert Operation with Sedina Balde, and it's just a great it shows you what could be done at Ace Studios. And the shame is that Henry, bless him, it was quite difficult. It was like pushing upriver to make a film of that quality at Ace. And it's a shame because I think if it had been a more of a filmmaker friendly studio, I don't know it's still active, but it certainly could have been more active and could have made better quality films.
Hmm.
Um, if that was more the case. I found it quite frustrating. And when we finished on Borderland, I don't think there was no storming out the door, but I just felt if you're going to come back, you either want to make a film as good as that or better. And the stuff that was coming in was evidently worse, the stuff that they were doing and the way it was functioning. So I stepped away and went to Vietnam or whatever else. I'm trying to remember the time frame, but I did a bunch of films in China, in other cities, and then went to Vietnam. I'm David. The thing is, for the names, places, incidents, I have a really good memory because I'm a writer. For numbers, I have a really struggle. The years of stuff. People say, "How many years have you been here? And what year was that film?" And I'm like, "Dude, I'm sorry, I've got no idea." So, do you have any questions?
I mean, you gave so much detail. That's great. Learned a bunch.
Yeah,
Thanks for sharing. A
no
couple
problem.
questions,
Yeah.
unrelated to Michael Biehn.